We're starting a brand new series, and it's called Greater. And we're going to be in the book of Hebrews, and we're going to be here for a little while, folks. This is going to take us right on into actually kind of our Christmas series. And so for the next 14 weeks, we are going to be looking at this remarkable book. Hebrews, if pastors can have favorites, this is my favorite. Right? Hebrews is my favorite, at least New Testament book. And the reason why I love it is because it's going to show us the superiority of Jesus. I mean, it just highlights his greatness. And I think one of the most challenging books in the New Testament is actually the book of Hebrews, because it assumes that you actually know your Old Testament. And so that's why on the way in, you should see like we have companion guides that I want to encourage you to buy. We are not making any money off the companion guides. In fact, we lose a little bit of money. But for $8, you can have kind of a companion guide that are going to give you kind of some midweek readings so that you can kind of read some of the Old Testament quotations and stories that the author just assumes that you know. So grab one of those if you haven't grabbed one on the way out. Another reason that I love this book is because not only is it going to show us the very greatness of who Jesus is, that this book has a way of showing us the things that compete against God. All of us in this room, we have things that are going to compete against God. Like it's going to compete for our hearts. What are we finding our hope in? And this book is meant to show you that whatever you're hoping in, if it's not him, it pales in comparison to him. And so this letter is remarkable. He is better in every single way. He's better than your health. He is better than your wealth. He's better than your comfort. He is a better deliverer. And I say that, and I'm going to repeat it because we're going to be entering into, for the next few months, some kind of tumultuous time for our country and culture, right? Looking for this political leader. And we can so easily try to find our hope in a political leader. And Jesus, I promise you, is far better. He is better in every single way. He is greater and better in every single thing. And so I am looking forward to the book of Hebrews. My soul needs it. And guess what? My soul says your soul needs it as well. And so let me give you kind of a quick flyby of like the why, the who, the when of this book, right? Why was this book written? Who wrote this book? When was it written? Things like that. So I'm going to be brief. Because we want to get into the text. Here's the why. Why is this book written? Well, like, I don't know about for any English teachers in the room or if you've been through English class, we were told immediately when we write a paper, have a thesis statement, right? Immediately within the first paragraph, when you read, you should know what that paper was meant to be about. Well, the author of Hebrews did not follow the American English teacher. Right? You find the reason all the way at the very end of the letter. And so if you're in the book of Hebrews already, you could go all the way to the back, chapter 13, right? Verse 22 gives us the reason why he writes this, right? I appeal to you, brothers, bear with my word of exhortation, for I have written to you briefly. That's the reason. It is a word of exhortation. He is wanting to incite and encourage these readers. So that's why he's writing. He's like, I need to bring a word of encouragement, right? Which then begs the question, like, who needs to be encouraged? Who is needing this encouragement? Well, if you read just a couple of verses later, it appears to be some Christians who are struggling in Italy. And so we got some struggling Christians in Italy, likely probably in Rome. They're undergoing hardships, trials, difficulties. And the author says, I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you. Now, who wrote the letter? That's the question everyone is asking. In fact, early on, there's a theologian, kind of church leader. His name was Origen. He was in like the 2nd century. And he says, God only knows who wrote Hebrews. We don't know exactly who wrote the book of Hebrews. The early church thought that the Apostle Paul is the one who wrote the book of Hebrews. The chances of that are unlikely, to be honest. I don't think the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Hebrews, although I do believe it was someone very close to Paul. Because at the very end, you see that he is friends with Timothy. Paul was really close to Timothy. And the reason that I don't believe it's Paul is because in the next week, we'll see there's a verse that appears that it's probably not, doesn't appear to be an apostle, but someone who was very close to an apostle. And so a lot of people speculate that the writer was Apollos, the individual that we see in the book of Acts. I personally, I think it's Barnabas. Right? There's a church historian named Eusebius that credits him as the author. He could have just been confident and confidently wrong. Who knows? I think it's Barnabas, and the reason is that he not only was a traveling partner with Paul, who had been close to Paul and close to Timothy. If you remember in the book of Acts, Barnabas actually isn't his real name. It means it's like a nickname. His name was Joseph, and Joseph was a Levite. Right? He was a Jew, but he was a Levitical Jew. And all of Hebrews is about the Old Testament system and basically the Levitical system. And so it would make sense if Barnabas was the author. Now, when we get to heaven, we'd be like, you were all wrong, right? You were all wrong. It was Priscilla, who knows, right? So we don't know. And so why was this exhortation happening? Was because these are struggling Christians, but they're struggling because they were going through not just hardships, they were actually going through persecution. And they were getting persecuted not merely by Nero during the time, because this book was likely written between 65, 66 AD, before the fall of the temple. And Nero was the Roman emperor or Caesar at the time, and he was persecuting Christians. In fact, at this time, it's highly likely that the Apostle Paul and Peter have already been executed. And if you can imagine these early Christians seeing they're these pillars of the faith, these giant pastors of the day, that they have already been executed by Nero, how much more would you be worried and struggling? And so not only are they being ostracized by the culture that they're in, their even own Jewish brothers, their kinsmen, don't want to have anything to do with them either. And so they're being ostracized socially, politically, economically. And so there's this draw now for these early Christians to want to say, maybe Jesus really isn't the answer. Maybe he isn't all that great. Because I am going through so many hardships right now. Maybe we should just go back to Judaism. And the author writes and says, oh, don't you dare go back. Because you don't go back. You go down. You infinitely descend, because Jesus is remarkable. He is greater in every way. And so we're going to spend a number of weeks looking at how great this author is. And so, just kind of a flyby is that the writer is going to show us that Jesus is greater, not just in his personhood, not just greater in person, but greater in his work. The first 4 chapters, if you kind of just scan, he's just going to show you, he's better in every way according to people, right? He is going to be better than the prophets. As we'll look at today, he's better than angels. In chapter 3, he's going to say he is better than Moses, right? The pillar of the Judaism and the Old Testament law, greater than Moses. Chapter 4, he is greater than Joshua. He is going to bring a better rest. Chapter 5, he's greater than Aaron, the high priest. And there he kind of shifts and not only says he's not only greater in person, he is greater in his work. And 5 through 10, it's the largest section in the book of Hebrews showing he is a better high priest. And not only is he a better high priest, he brings a better covenant, which means we have a better relationship with God. And he is a better sacrifice. How so? He is a better sacrifice because he is a final sacrifice. Doesn't need to be repeated. He's a willing sacrifice. Don't need to tie him down. And he is a divine sacrifice. And so you're just gonna see in every way, Jesus is better in his person and he is better in his work. It's remarkable. I mean, this argument that he shows is just meant to just lift Jesus up. And then throughout this great book, showing the superiority, showing the greatness of who Jesus is, he's also gonna show us the importance of the Christian to endure during hardships. That believers, genuine Christianity is marked by endurance and marked by perseverance. And so throughout this letter of Hebrews, he's gonna kind of sprinkle in after these exaltations of Jesus, he's gonna give 5 warnings. 5 warnings. And all of them are saying, don't you dare go back, right? Don't drift, don't depart, don't be dull of hearing. And he's just gonna warn, he's saying you need to endure, you need to persevere. Right, I've said it often. He's like, this is the mark of a genuine believer. You persevere, right? How do you know a cat's a cat? They meow. How do you know a dog's a dog? They bark. How do you know a Christian is really a genuine Christian? Answer, they persevere. They persevere. And so that's why the Apostle Paul, remember what he says right before in 2 Timothy, right before he's gonna be executed. What does he say? He says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I have endured all the way to the end. And so that's what he's showing us. And so we hold fast. We hold fast to Christ, not just so that we can show that we're courageous. We hold fast to Christ because he's superior to everything. He is great. And so, there is we're gonna get to some challenging text. Where we're gonna look at, it's like you're gonna read some of these. That's why the companion guide is so helpful, because you're gonna be reading some Old Testament stuff and you're gonna be seeing what the text is saying even before you come. And you're gonna be coming to some text and be like, can we as Christians lose our salvation? Can we lose this incredible gift that God has given us? Because in the book of Hebrews, he's gonna be talking about apostates. You know what an apostate is? An apostate is an individual who is actually walking away from their faith. And so he's gonna talk about that. And there's gonna be some warnings. And he doesn't think that they're apostates. He doesn't think that they're gonna lose their salvation, but he's recognizing that when he writes to them, there's something alarming about these individuals that cause him concern. That's why he's writing and exhorting and encouraging, right? He's writing because they're showing themselves to be people that are you genuine? Are you a genuine believer? And so he warns them because they aren't maturing. He is gonna warn them because they aren't actually growing in their relationship with Jesus, right? Some of them have quit going to church. Some of them have quit gathering together in community. And so he's writing to encourage, they're not growing. To which then begs, what a wonderful letter for all of us. Am I growing? Are you growing in your relationship with God? Is your view of Jesus getting greater, bigger? There's a scene in one of the Narnia books. I don't know if it's in the movie. I haven't watched the movies in a while, but there's a scene in the book of Narnia where C.S. Lewis, as he's writing, Aslan, who is kind of a figure of Christ, there's a scene where Lucy sees Aslan, and Aslan is underneath this moonlight, and he is just glowing, he is radiant. And when she sees him, she's overjoyed, and she runs to him, and Aslan kind of runs to her, And they hug and they kind of like fall over and Lucy is just kind of laying up against him. And she says these words. She looks at him like overjoyed and she goes, Aslan, are you getting bigger? And Aslan's response is great. He says, it's because you're older, little one. And she just looks at him kind of inquisitively and she says, it's not because you're getting bigger. And he says, I am not. I am not getting bigger, but every year you grow, right, you will find me bigger. See, God doesn't change, right? God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But what a great thing for me. Like the more that I see Jesus, the more you and I encounter Jesus, love him, like the bigger and the greater he becomes. And so, is he getting bigger? Oh, throughout the series, I pray that he'd get bigger and greater. You have your Bibles? That's all intro, right? That's a 17-minute intro. I got to get going. All right, Hebrews 1. Right, here's what, companion guys, grab them, start making notes. Jesus right here is gonna show, what are we gonna see in Hebrews 1 through 3? Jesus is greater than something. He is greater than the prophets. He is a better revelation, a better revealed truth. You see that? Verse 1, long ago at many times and in many ways, God spoke through the prophets. He spoke to our fathers through the prophets. Remember, like you start reading in the Old Testament is just filled with God's like kind of mouthpiece. And God's mouthpiece were prophets. And these prophets got kind of revelations from God in various ways. Some through dreams, right? Jacob had dreams. Joseph had dreams. Daniel had dreams. In other ways that God spoke, like God spoke to his prophet Moses, like on Mount Sinai, kind of face to face, right? And so God used prophets in the Old Testament to speak on his behalf. There's an elder that we have. I've heard him say it actually a few times. In the 70s, there was a guy named E.F. Hutton. All right, this is before my day. So for those of you who are my age and younger, I mean, like, E.F. who? Like E.F. Hutton, right? E.F. Hutton, though, this guy, apparently that when he spoke, people listened. Well, the same is true here. When the prophet spoke, people listened because they knew it was from God, right? And so, but we have someone greater now because God is about to do a new work, something better, something greater. What is it? Verse 2, in the past, God spoke through the prophets, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. Now, actually, a more literal translation would be God has spoken to us through a son, right? The his actually isn't there. The point is, I think that the author is showing is that in the past, God used servants to communicate his truth. Now he's using something far greater than a servant, than a prophet. He is speaking through the Son. Sonship, right? It's like all the prophets of old, especially all the Old Testament. What I love about the Old Testament is that all of it's saying, it's pointing, someone's coming. A deliverer's coming, someone who's gonna give rest and peace and life and hope. And so all the prophets are pointing, it's like they're preparatory, they're anticipating. And now, the final revelation of God has come. Because what does it say? In these what? Last days, it is the final and full revelation of God. And who's it through? A son. The Son has arrived. Right? Jesus is he's greater in his person and he is greater in his work. And what this author is going to do is that you're just gonna see over and over, like especially in this chapter, who is this Son? How are we to see who this Son is? How different is he than the prophets, than the angels, or any other created thing? Well, let's look. Let's look at this Son. Verse 2, but in these last days he has spoken. He has spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. The Son is the one who has been appointed heir. He is heir of all things, meaning nothing is outside of his circle, his domain. We just sang a song, Holy Forever, where all rules, powers, and dominions belong to him. In fact, throughout chapter 1, if you have like a Bible, or even if you're on your phone, I hope that you see, like you just kind of scroll down chapter 1, all types of like, either your words are in all caps, or they're kind of italicized. This chapter is just filled with just Old Testament quotations. He's just quoting Old Testament verses. And I think right here is just another allusion, because he's going to continually point to Psalm 2. Psalm 2 is one of the rare psalms. It's merely prophetic. Like, it's a prophetic psalm, meaning it's a prophetic song of the coming Messiah, the one who is going to deliver, the one who will give rest, the one who will rule the nations. And right here we see, right, this Son is going to rule over all things. All things will be sitting under his feet. And so he is, you could put down, he is the Omega. He is the end, right? He rules and he will judge. But he's not just the Omega. What else is he? He is the Alpha. You see that in the very next clause, right? Whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he also created the world. The Son isn't just the Omega, the Son is the Alpha, right? He is where the world and the cosmos and creation actually comes from him. The author of Hebrews sees Jesus not just as the final revelation of God, he is the one who brings the world into existence. He is the final and full word of God. Jesus is the Alpha, he is the Omega, he is the beginning and the end. And the end. And so, and he keeps going, verse 3. Look at how the Son continues to describe, or how the author continues to describe the Son, verse 3. Right? He's like, I don't want you to misunderstand. He is not a created being. Right? He is, verse 3, he is the radiance of God's glory. And he is the exact representation of his being. Right? He is the exact representation, he is the exact icon of who God is. You want to know who God is? You look at the Son. He is fully God, meaning he is not a cheap knockoff. He is not like I've shared it before, he's not the Aldi brand of cereal, right? Knockoff. I can spot it in a second. I love Aldi, love it, love. But their cereals, they're knockoffs, right? Honey Grams are not Golden Grams, right? Fruity Rounds, not even close to Fruit Loops. Not close. What was it, the Honey Smacks? No, Honey Wheats. Honey Wheats is what Aldi is. It's not Honey Smacks. Those are delicious, delicious. I have digressed. The point is that the Son is the exact representation of who God is, right? The Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Father, but everything the Father is, the Son is. The Son is fully, fully divine. And in verse 3, it goes on. He's the exact icon, the imprint, representation of who God is. And what else is he? He upholds the universe by the word of his power. He holds the world in his hands. Isn't that interesting? Well, isn't that the same thing as creating? No, right? The Son is creator of the universe. You realize that? He is the one he spoke the world into existence. Jesus is our creator. And it's not just Hebrews 1. You see that in John 1, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Through him, all things were made that has been made. Nothing has not been made except through him. Colossians 1 will say the same thing. For by him, all things were made in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authority, all things were created by him and for him, speaking of Jesus. And so Jesus is not just the creator. Here, the author is saying he is also our sustainer. He maintains, which is helpful for us because we aren't deists. You know what a deist is? A deist is someone who believes that God created, but then they're like hands off, almost like a watchmaker. They make a watch, set the time, let it go. That's not Jesus. We're not deists. He maintains, he holds creation by the words of his mouth. And so, the fullness of God dwells in bodily form with Jesus. He is not like the Greek figure Atlas. Remember, Atlas has like the universe or the heavens on his back straining. That's not Jesus. He's not straining. He upholds the word. He upholds the universe by the word of his mouth. At the end of verse 3, we just keep trucking. Right? Something else is true about Jesus. So we have seen he is our creator, sustainer, right? He's really kind of our king, our sovereign. What else is true? Verse 3, after making purifications for sins, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high, right? He's not just a sovereign king. He's not just a sovereign ruler. What else is he? He's priest. He is someone who's going to show you he's sovereign, but he will bring a sacrifice that will purify you and cleanse you and make you right and whole. He is king, he is priest, he is sovereign, he is a sacrifice. In the Old Testament, what you see over and over again is that there's a way that you would have to sacrifice over and over, day in, day out. And it would propitiate sin, meaning it would kind of satisfy God's wrath for a season, but then you just had to continually do it. As the Puritans say, the sacrifices in the Old Testament, it might have propitiated sin, but it didn't expiate sin. Jesus propitiates, like he satisfies God's wrath, but he expiates, meaning he removes our sin as far as the east is from the west. Completely removes. He's remarkable in every way. Jesus is the one who purged sin finally and fully because he's our sacrifice. In fact, it tells us like he makes purification for sin. He is able to cleanse us finally and fully. But you notice he says, and then afterwards, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. Meaning like, if you are, again, that's why this companion guide is so helpful, as you will read throughout the Old Testament, these stories, that if you see the tabernacle or the tabernacle is kind of the mobile version of the temple before the temple was there permanently. In the tabernacle, in the temple, there was all types of furniture. You would walk into the most holy place and you would see, and I'll explain this in chapter 9, but you'll see that there's lamps, right? There is the menorah representing kind of the light of God for the nation. You would see a table of bread, meaning like he will be your sustenance and your food and your life. There was even incense, right? Where like a sweet smelling aroma that there's a sweetness to God. There was a basin, and there was a furniture basin where you would wash and cleanse yourself. But you know what you never saw in the temple? There was a piece of furniture you never ever saw. You know what it was? A chair. There was no chair in the temple. Why? Because you never got to rest. It was a machine that always needed to be fed. Always sacrifices going on, always, over again. And yet here, he sits. Why does he sit? Because it is finished. He has provided purifications for sins who will come to him. Right? His work is final. His work is complete. That's why in the very last book in our Bible, Revelation, we saw that, I don't know, how time flies. A few months ago we were in Revelation, and you remember in the scene in heaven where John, in chapter 5, he says, to him who sits on the throne, because he is king. And not only to the one who sits on the throne, and to our what? And to the Lamb, our great sacrifice. To him be blessing and honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. Right, these are just the first 3 verses in Hebrews. Glorious truths showing us who Jesus is. He is the final revelation of God here. Right? He is our Alpha, he is our Omega, the beginning and the end. He sustains and he provides purification for sins. Woo! I don't need an amen, but I'll add to my heart that says amen, right? Thank you for that. And we have more. We're not even done. That's just the first 3 verses. Let's keep going. How else is Jesus better? How else is Jesus greater? He's greater than the prophets. But in verse 4, we're gonna see, how else is he greater? He's greater than the angels. Now, this whole section seems a little bit more strange to me, like why on earth is he gonna be compared to angels? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I don't feel like I've ever gotten a good answer on the things that we read. One of the reasons, some actually think, and the day that it was written, and even today, that Jesus is just a created being. He's like an angel. In fact, there are heretical cults or even cults that see like Jesus is just a created being. The author is going to show you that cannot be. It is not. He is not a created being. He's not an angel. He's not brother to Lucifer. Right? Also, I think he brings in angels because angels in Deuteronomy 33-ish, as well as in Galatians 3, where angels were attributed as the ones who gave the law to the Jews on Mount Sinai, almost like as a mediator, that God used the angels to give Moses the law. Either way, let's see how Jesus, he is greater than the angels. Verse 4, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son? Today I have begotten you. Right? No other angel has ever been given this title of begotten son. Angels aren't called begotten sons. There is one section like I think in Job, where angels have been referenced as the sons of God, but they have never been called the begotten son. And so angels are, here's how I would say it, and this is where you're gonna wanna take some notes here, because these next couple verses are a little challenging. Angels are created, but they're not begotten. Right? The author is gonna show you that he's gonna labor to show you that angels are created and they are servants. They are not divine and they are not a son. Right? Begotten language, today I've begotten you. Begotten is not talking about chronology. You need to write that down. It's not talking about chronology. It's talking about nature. Again, there are cults that will talk about, they see Jesus as a created being. Maybe the first created being, right? He is begotten. He is not created. He isn't a created son. He's not an adopted son. The point that the author is showing you is that Jesus, as the son, is made of the same stuff as the Father. That's probably not the best word. He is made of the same essence as the Father. So what is true of the Father is true of the Son. Jesus is the begotten Son of God. He's the begotten Son of God. Now, verse 6. Maybe you're not convinced. Maybe you're saying, well, that I don't know. So how about verse 6? Like, he's gonna continue to show you. I want you to see the divinity, the godness of the Son. Verse 6. And again, When he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. Now, if you're like me, you're like, that doesn't solve the problem. That just actually makes it more difficult. Because then all of a sudden he brings in firstborn language. Again, when we as Westerners, when we hear firstborn, what do we think? Firstborn, right? Ben is my what? Firstborn son. He's my only born son. He's my firstborn child. Yes, when we see or read firstborn, we immediately think chronology. Whereas the author is saying, don't think chronology. Think firstborn means preeminent. Remember the book of Genesis, the firstborn are the ones that get what? The preeminence, the blessings, the superiority. Remember, that's why Jacob has to deceive his father and take Esau's blessing. He wants preeminence. He wants blessing. And so, but you keep on reading. Let all God's angels what? Let all God's angels worship him. Again, another Old Testament quotation right here. All the angels of God are meant to worship the Son. So, Jesus isn't a created being. Because, why? Because he receives worship. Start to process with me, right? Who only receives worship? God. God alone is the only person who welcomes worship. Right? What's the first commandment that we saw God give the Israelites in the Old Testament? Right? You shall have what? No other gods before me. You will only worship me, is what God tells his people. And yet here we're seeing, let the angels of God worship him. Worship him. God is a jealous God. He does not parcel out his glory and his worship. Even to Isaiah, as God speaks through Isaiah, he says, for my own sake I do it, for my own sake. For why should my glory be profaned? Why should my glory be defamed? My glory I will not give to another. God is jealous for his glory. He is jealous for his worship. And so when the Son receives worship, we're seeing the Son is fully divine. He is fully God. And in fact, when anybody else tries to receive worship, they say, stop it. The Apostle Paul, when he does miracle signs and wonders in Acts, they fall down and worship. He's like, don't do that. Don't worship me. Worship God. John in the book of Revelation at the very end, chapter 22, remember he sees this great vision of what God's going to do, and he falls down and he worships the angels, and the angel goes, stop it. Don't do that. That's for God and God alone. So who receives worship? Only God receives worship. And so who is God? The Son. The Son is fully God. Verse 7, and the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds, ministers of flames of fire, meaning just real quickly, verse 7 is just saying, angels are what? They're created servants. Angels are just going to do the very bidding of what God asks them to do. They are servants and servants alone. They will serve the divine Son. They'll worship him too. And in verse 8, you're going to want to circle this. Verse 8, but of the Son, he says what? Your throne, what? O God. Circle that. But of the Son, your throne, O God, is forever. The scepter of uprightness is a scepter of your kingdom. You see what he's saying? The Son is divine. He is called God. Verse 8, verse 10. And you, Lord, and you, God, you're the one who laid the foundations of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Again, he's just quoting not just Psalm 45, but now Psalm 102. It's like we're just told over and over by the author, don't misunderstand who the Son is. He is not a created being. He is fully God. He is divine. Verse 11, verse 12, he is immutable. He is eternal. Are you familiar with immutability? Immutability is like this idea that it's the doctrine of like he doesn't change. He is always and is. Like, he does not shift like shadows. So the sun never changes and the sun has no end because he's eternal. You see that in verse 11? They will perish, but you remain. They will wear out like a garment, like a robe. You will roll them up like a garment. They will be changed, but who? The sun is the same, and your years will have no end. The sun is the radiance of God's glory. He is the exact representation of his being. The sun is immutable. He does not change. He stays exactly the same. He remains, and the sun is eternal. There is no end. And so is he greater than the angels? He is infinitely greater than the angels. And he's infinitely higher than the angelic realm. And lastly, in verse 14, fascinating little verse, you're going to see that Jesus, he is the Son of God, and angels are merely just servants of God, right? They're messengers. They do God's bidding. But in verse 14, they do something else. Are they not all ministering spirits, referring to angels? Are not all these angels just ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who inherit salvation? Who are those who inherit salvation? Those us'uns, right? That is us. And so angels, we're told, serve those who inherit salvation. They serve us. Is it true that we have guardian angels? Verse 14 seems to say so, that we have angels serving even us. I can't wait to meet my angel, right? Bud, right? I feel like his name's Bud, right? And so, right, we all have servants, angels that serve us. And so, are you catching what this author is doing? He's just showing us, right, the exaltation of who Jesus is. Next week, we're going to see, like, not just who Jesus is, but, like, what was the greatest thing that he has done. Right, you're going to have to come back. But we see the exaltation, the very supremacy, the very greatness of our God. And so do we need this? We need this. And some of us know, like in our heads, that Jesus is divine and that he is the very Son of God. But that is meant to go from your head to your heart, because like when we struggle, and remember, these are Christians who are struggling. They are going through persecutions and hardships, and they're thinking like everything that they were thinking would happen is not happening. And they're thinking, is really God for me? Is he against me? Is he all that great? Is he all that special? It's like we have to be reminded of who he is. Because when we see who he is, like what? He becomes bigger. And when he's bigger, we need to know he's better. And so wherever our hearts are starting to wander and we want to say, oh, our hope might be in that. Our hope might be in that. It's like, it's always in him. He's greater in every single way. He is our king. He is our priest. He is our sovereign. He is our sacrifice. And he is going to show us like how great he truly is. And so let's pray together. Father in heaven, if there is anyone here, anyone listening online that has never looked to Jesus as king, as priest, as the one who rules all things, but at the same time has provided a way so that we can be cleansed and forgiven and righteous before your eyes, I pray that they would look to Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, knowing that there is life. And God, when our hearts, especially this week, struggling trying to find hope and life in other things and other people and other whatever it might be, that you would draw our attention back to the Son, that he would be bigger and bigger and bigger, I pray. And all God's people said, amen.